Remember the 5th of November, the gunpowder, treason, and plot.
Most people remember this iconic anti-hero being played by Hugo Weaving. However, that almost wasn't the case. What you might not remember is that the Wachowskis' adaptation of Alan Moore and David Lloyd's seminal classic V for Vendetta almost looked very different. Believe it or not, Hugo Weaving was not the original actor cast as the film's titular vigilante. James Purefoy from HBO's Rome and Fox's primetime horror drama The Following was initially the man in that role, but dropped out just after filming for a few weeks. Fans have cast wild speculation as to why he was let go from the film. Creative differences, arguments with the director, scheduling conflicts. Well, let's take a little bit of a deeper dive into what exactly went on behind the scenes of what many consider to be a modern cult classic. An attempt to parse out what really happened to V for Vendetta. At this point, the character of V is recognized around the globe for his iconic mask design inspired by notorious British insurrectionist Guy Fawkes. Its existence as a comic book is a far second to the life it's had as a symbol for mass unrest and a desire for political change across the globe. It's a film that has spawned a political movement unlike any film in history, or let me rephrase that to be much more succinct. It's a film whose look and aesthetic has taken shape within political movements unlike any film in history. Freedom fighters, activists, and political dissidents alike have all adopted the iconic Guy Fawkes mask as a means of protesting corrupt systems. The personification of anarchy, this mask was modeled after the design created by illustrator David Lloyd and writer Alan Moore. Many readers and filmgoers alike think of V for Vendetta as a single self-contained work, a shrieking howl about the evils and repressive tactics that authoritarian governments use to subjugate their people. However, the book was originally serialized in 1982 in the English anthology comics magazine titled Warrior, aiming to be the answer to England's beloved 2000 AD. Warrior sought to give their creators more artistic freedom, ownership of their rights, and an audience that was seeking mature storytelling in a medium often thought of as being for children. So this didn't start as a political movement. Alan Moore was one of the breakout writers who was published by Warrior. Thanks to the double whammy of V and his postmodern reimagining of Marvel Man, Moore skyrocketed to the top of the British comic book scene in a few short years. Meanwhile, the 1980s saw a massive uptick in interest in English writers from American publishers, and Alan Moore was quickly courted by DC Comics to bring his skills and V for Vendetta across the pond. Legend has it that Moore was so impressed with the overtures and promises that DC editors Karen Berger and Paul Levitz made that when offered a contract for both Watchmen and V, which at the time he owned outright, he signed them on the spot. Moore was assured full ownership, creative freedom, and a respectable payday. He signed right then and there without showing the contracts to a lawyer. And as you might imagine, being that we're here talking about this very moment, this would prove to be a big mistake for Moore and his collaborators. The way the contracts were worded is that after the comic books went out of print, the rights would revert back to Moore and Lloyd. This was prior to the graphic novel being an industry staple. However, both Watchmen, co-created with Dave Gibbons, and V for Vendetta sold so well that DC began to reprint the books in the collected format. This quickly propelled both books into being perennial bestsellers, and the rights, therefore, have literally never reverted back to the creators. This allowed Warner Brothers, the parent company of DC Comics, to make attempts at exploiting both V and Watchmen on the silver screen, regardless of what the original creators wanted. Which brings us to the Wachowskis and James McTeigue. He established a working relationship with the Wachowskis by working as the assistant director on the Matrix films. And this is where things start to get muddled. Much like the perennially in development Watchmen film, V for Vendetta languished for many years, despite Alan Moore stating that he did not want a film to be produced. Joel Silver jump-started the project as producer and enlisted the Wachowskis to write it, despite the creator stating, no thank you. Development on this endeavor started back before the Matrix films were even released. After completing production of Matrix Revolutions, the group decided to revisit the idea for V, which, again, had been sitting basically dormant, and use their post-Matrix cachet to push the film out of development hell and into production, finally. One of the main issues at hand was that studios were nervous to greenlight a film that featured a lead character who wore a mask for the entire runtime of said film. They were not convinced an audience would embrace this at all, especially in the era of star power and faces driving box office numbers. Silver, the Wachowskis, and McTeigue, however, considered this an interesting creative problem to solve, which, is literally what every movie and every script is. See, there's obviously a big difference between Darth Vader stomping around on set and then later being ADR'd over by James Earl Jones, and a leading actor, arguably the star of a picture, carrying an entire film with a 2-inch piece of plastic over their face. Here, we had a challenge, one that the core creatives all thought James Purefoy was capable of meeting. They felt his on-screen performance was unique and that his intensity as an actor would provide exactly what they were looking for to make that mask pop like, well, a maskless person would. See, the Wachowskis have often been hailed as industry auteurs. The auteur theory, first coined by the French film critic Andrew Sarris, states that in film, the director is the central creative voice of the project. V for Vendetta was their attempt at taking a step back, to let James be the central creative voice, to remove the veil of auteur theory. They operated on the film only as writers and producers. Despite their intentions of remaining passively involved throughout the project, they were quickly called in to fix a major issue. After only a few weeks of shooting, Joel Silver called everyone together with one big central concern. And, well, it was one that the film would live or die by. Was V scary enough? Was Purefoy projecting through the mask? Were they succeeding in this kind of weird experiment that even the creator of the character himself didn't even want to exist? According to many reports, the Wachowskis, Silver, the director, well, they felt the answer was no. That James Purefoy was not delivering a performance that was communicating what they had hoped. They were worried that their very, very expensive play was going south. So they made what was essentially the most dramatic decision you can make at that point in filming. They fired him. The Wachowskis then reached out to their old Matrix friend Hugo Weaving, and he agreed to take over the role. And then things get weirder because budgets get involved. Much of Purefoy's footage was reshot. However, there are a few shots in the film that have survived. His performance, his body, is there. Weaving just dubbed the dialogue. Now, the Wachowskis and Purefoy have remained pretty tight-lipped about the specific details surrounding their creative differences. But the truth is leaked out here and there. To this day, whenever V for Vendetta gets brought up, Purefoy's consternation is visible. He's not the only person that was upset about the release of the V for Vendetta film. However, Alan Moore was so disgruntled by his treatment by Warner and DC that he requested his name be taken off the film, the guy who created V for Vendetta, and his share of the royalties be given to David Lloyd. He has said repeatedly in interviews that he will never watch the film, as he feels the rights to his book were stolen from him. So what you ended up getting on screen, well, wasn't exactly what was intended when this whole story was first being written by the people that first sat down to write it. Risks are a funny thing, which is what all of this is to really say. And film is a weird industry to take them in a lot of times, which is kind of how we've ended up in this very homogenized space we're in. V for Vendetta was a risk. Not only were they taking a risk in basically alienating the person that created it, not allowing their voice to be heard, which, you know, in a project like this might have made it even better. So I think the real lesson here isn't don't take risks, that's not it at all. I think it's that taking risks should be maybe a little bit more calculated, and sure, sometimes risks that aren't so calculated, risks that end up a little messy, turn out to be beautiful pieces of art, but most of the time they end up like Josh Trank's Fantastic Four.
The matter from Earth is being converted to energy! We need to stop Victor, he's the source!
And that's because when dealing with many people, instead of working by yourself, everybody has to be on board. And in the case of V for Vendetta, the guy that created the titular character wasn't. Your lead actor wasn't, at least not in the way you'd expect them to. And being put on the ropes doesn't always create something good. So, if you're creating, if you're working with others, if you're taking risks, make sure you know what you're getting into. Make sure you know exactly how to define that risk. So when you get on set, so when you get in front of that audience and things aren't going the way you planned, you have the voices that matter behind you, working with you to find that backup plan. That's it for today's episode of Nerdstalgic. If you enjoyed this one, press that like button down below. As always, hit that subscribe button too. You won't miss anything on your screen right now. 2 more episodes of Nerdstalgic. You can click on either of those, stay right here. And hopefully, I will see you guys in the next video.